The morning sun beat down on the dusty Afghan compound as Sarah Martinez loaded the last supply crate onto the transport truck. Sweat dripped down her face, mixing dirt and exhaustion into streaks across her cheeks. The soldiers around her barely glanced in her direction. To them, she was just another logistics specialist, someone who moved boxes and counted supplies while the real soldiers did the fighting. "Hey, cargo girl," Staff Sergeant Davis called out from across the courtyard. "Make sure those medical supplies are secured. We can't afford to lose them on the way to Forward Operating Base Hawk." Sarah gritted her teeth at the nickname. It had followed her for 8 months now, ever since she'd been assigned to the 82nd Airborne Supply Unit. No matter how efficiently she organized shipments or how perfectly she maintained inventory records, she remained invisible to most of her unit. Just the girl who handled the cargo. She adjusted the straps on the crate one final time and wiped her hands on her combat uniform. "All secure, Sergeant," she replied, her voice steady despite the frustration burning in her chest. Captain Rodriguez emerged from the command tent, his expression grim as he studied a map in his hands. Behind him followed Lieutenant Thompson and Sergeant Major Williams, both looking equally concerned. Sarah had seen that look before. It meant trouble was brewing somewhere in their area of operations. "Listen up," Captain Rodriguez shouted, his voice carrying across the compound. "Intelligence reports indicate increased insurgent activity along Route Falcon. We're moving out in 20 minutes to resupply FOB Hawk. This isn't a milk run, people. Stay alert and keep your weapons ready." The soldiers around Sarah began checking their gear with renewed urgency. M4 rifles were inspected, magazines counted, and body armor adjusted. Sarah went through the same motions, though she knew most of the unit saw her weapon as more ceremonial than practical. After all, what did a cargo specialist need with marksmanship skills? If only they knew the truth about her past. Before joining the Army, Sarah had grown up on a ranch in Montana where her grandfather had taught her to hunt. Old Jack Martinez had been a Marine sniper in Vietnam, and he'd passed down his knowledge to his eager granddaughter. By age 16, Sarah could put a bullet through a dime at 300 yards. Her grandfather's lessons had been thorough: wind reading, breathing control, patience, and the mental discipline required to make impossible shots. But none of that mattered here. The Army had assigned her to logistics based on her test scores and interviews, and she'd never had the chance to demonstrate her true abilities. Her fellow soldiers saw her small frame and quiet demeanor and assumed she was better suited for moving boxes than fighting enemies. The convoy formed up near the main gate. 3 Humvees and 2 supply trucks prepared to make the journey to FOB Hawk, a remote outpost 30 miles through dangerous territory. Sarah climbed into the passenger seat of the lead supply truck, her M4 rifle propped between her knees. The driver, Private Johnson, gave her a friendly nod. "First time on Route Falcon?" he asked, starting the engine. Sarah shook her head. "It's getting worse out there." Johnson's expression grew serious. "Yeah. I heard they hit a patrol last week. 2 wounded, 1 vehicle disabled. The insurgents are getting bolder." As the convoy rolled through the compound gates, Sarah noticed the extra tension in the air. The turret gunners swiveled their weapons constantly, scanning the horizon for threats. Radio chatter crackled through their headsets as spotters reported clear sectors and potential hazards. The first 10 miles passed without incident. The convoy moved at a steady pace along the paved road, kicking up clouds of dust that hung in the still air. Sarah studied the terrain through her window. Rocky hills, scattered vegetation, and too many places for an enemy to hide. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. "Always know your environment, Sarah. The land will tell you everything you need to know." "Contact left." The radio crackled with sudden urgency. "Muzzle flashes in the hills. 2 o'clock from lead vehicle." The convoy immediately reacted. Drivers pushed their vehicles faster while gunners returned fire toward the hillside. Sarah could see the bright flashes of enemy weapons hidden among the rocks, at least 4 or 5 positions spread across a quarter-mile front. "This is a coordinated ambush," she realized, watching the pattern of fire. The insurgents had chosen their position perfectly. High ground with multiple escape routes and clear fields of fire across the road. The lead Humvee's gunner opened up with his .50 caliber machine gun, sending heavy rounds into the hillside. But the enemy fire continued, and Sarah could see their shots getting closer to the convoy vehicles. One round shattered the windshield of the Humvee behind them. "We need to get through this kill zone fast." Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the radio. "All vehicles, maximum speed." But then disaster struck. An explosion erupted under the lead Humvee as it hit an improvised explosive device. The vehicle lurched to one side, its front axle shattered and engine smoking. The convoy ground to a halt. "Lead vehicle is disabled," Lieutenant Thompson reported. "We're sitting ducks out here." The insurgent fire intensified, focusing on the stopped convoy. Bullets pinged off armor plating and shattered windows. The soldiers dismounted and took cover behind their vehicles, returning fire with their rifles. But they were trapped in the open with limited cover and an enemy holding the high ground. Sarah crouched behind the supply truck, her heart pounding as she assessed the situation. The enemy positions were at least 400 yards away, well beyond the effective range of most of the soldiers' M4 rifles. The .50 caliber machine gun was providing suppressive fire, but it couldn't accurately target individual enemy positions from this distance. She studied the hillside through her rifle scope, identifying 5 separate firing positions. The insurgents were well concealed among the rocks, using natural cover to protect themselves while maintaining clear shots at the convoy. It was a professional ambush, planned and executed with military precision. "We need close air support," Captain Rodriguez shouted into his radio. "How long until we get air cover?" The reply crackled back. "Air support is 20 minutes out. Apache helicopters en route to your position. 20 minutes might as well be 20 hours. The convoy was taking steady fire, and Sarah could see several soldiers had already been wounded. The insurgents knew they had a limited window to inflict maximum damage before air support arrived. That's when Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. Movement in the hills suggested the insurgents were flanking the convoy, trying to get closer for a more devastating attack. If they succeeded in closing the distance, the convoy would be completely overrun. She made a decision that would change everything. Quietly, Sarah moved to the back of the supply truck and opened one of the cargo containers. Inside, among the medical supplies and ammunition, was a case she had personally secured. Her hands found the familiar weight of her grandfather's rifle, a customized Remington 700 with a high-powered scope that she had somehow convinced the supply clerks to include in her personal gear. The rifle felt like coming home. Sarah had maintained it perfectly throughout her deployment, hoping for a chance that had never come. Until now. She chambered around and moved to a position where she could see the hillside clearly. Through the scope, the enemy positions came into sharp focus. She could see individual insurgents moving between the rocks, believing themselves safe at this distance. Her grandfather's training took over. Sarah calculated wind speed and direction, estimated range, and controlled her breathing. She found her first target, an insurgent with an RPG who was moving to a position where he could destroy one of the Humvees. The shot was over 400 yards, uphill, with a crosswind. For most soldiers, it would be impossible. For Sarah Martinez, granddaughter of a Marine sniper, it was just another day at the ranch. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and through the scope, she watched the insurgent with the RPG suddenly crumple and fall. The weapon tumbled down the hillside, no longer a threat to the convoy. But Sarah wasn't finished. She worked the bolt smoothly, chambering another round. Her next target was a machine gunner who had been pouring accurate fire into the convoy position. Another careful calculation, another controlled breath, another perfect shot. The enemy machine gun fell silent. One by one, Sarah began eliminating the insurgent positions with surgical precision. Each shot was carefully planned and flawlessly executed. The insurgents, confused by their comrades falling to an unseen sniper, began to break their discipline and expose themselves as they tried to locate the source of the deadly accurate fire. It was exactly what Sarah had been waiting for. The remaining insurgents fell in rapid succession. Sarah's rifle spoke 5 times in less than 3 minutes, and the hillside that had been alive with enemy fire became eerily quiet. The ambush was broken. For a moment, silence hung over the convoy. The soldiers looked around in confusion, unable to understand how the enemy fire had suddenly stopped. They had been preparing for a desperate fight, and now their attackers were simply gone. Captain Rodriguez was the first to spot Sarah behind the supply truck, her grandfather's rifle still smoking in her hands. His expression shifted from confusion to amazement as he realized what had happened. "Martinez," he called out. "Did you just—" Sarah lowered the rifle, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "5 targets eliminated, sir. The ambush is broken." The entire convoy stared at her in stunned silence. The quiet logistics specialist, the girl they had dismissed as just another cargo handler, had single-handedly ended a coordinated enemy ambush with 5 impossible shots. Staff Sergeant Davis approached slowly, his earlier dismissive attitude completely gone. "Those were 400-yard shots. Minimum. In combat conditions, how did you—" "My grandfather taught me," Sarah replied simply, beginning to disassemble her rifle for transport. "He always said that every soldier should know how to fight, regardless of their assigned job." Lieutenant Thompson shook his head in disbelief. "We've been sitting here for 8 months with a sniper and didn't even know it. Command is going to want to hear about this." But Sarah was already focused on the mission. "Sir, we should move out quickly. Other insurgent units might have heard the gunfire and could be moving to investigate. FOB Hawk is still expecting their supplies." Captain Rodriguez nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on Sarah with a new respect. "You're right. Let's get the damaged Humvee secured and move out. And, Martinez, we'll be talking more about this when we get back to base." As the convoy prepared to continue their journey, word of Sarah's action spread quickly among the soldiers. The girl they had called Cargo Girl had just saved all their lives with skills none of them had imagined she possessed. The dynamics of the unit had shifted in those 3 minutes of gunfire. Sarah Martinez was no longer invisible, no longer just another logistics specialist moving boxes around the compound. She had revealed herself as something far more dangerous and valuable, a precision marksman with the skills to turn the tide of any engagement. But this was only the beginning of Sarah's transformation from dismissed support personnel to legendary protector. The convoy still had 20 miles of dangerous territory to cover, and word of the ambush would spread quickly through the insurgent networks. Other enemies were already moving to intercept them, and Sarah's newfound reputation was about to be put to an even deadlier test. The convoy moved forward with a different energy now. Where before there had been casual chatter and routine vigilance, now there was focused intensity and something else: respect. Sarah could feel the changed atmosphere as clearly as she could feel the weight of her grandfather's rifle now openly displayed across her lap. Private Johnson glanced at her repeatedly as he drove, stealing looks at the weapon that had just saved their lives. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, how long have you been able to shoot like that?" Sarah watched the road ahead, her eyes constantly scanning for threats. "Since I was 12. My grandfather started teaching me when I could barely hold his rifle steady." "And the army just stuck you in logistics?" Johnson's voice carried disbelief. "That seems like a waste of serious talent." Before Sarah could respond, Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio. "All vehicles, be advised. Drone surveillance shows movement in grid. Square 472. Possible insurgent vehicle heading toward our route. Stay sharp." Sarah immediately shifted her focus to the terrain ahead. Grid Square 472 was about 10 miles in front of them, where Route Falcon curved around a rocky outcropping. It was another perfect ambush site. Elevated positions on both sides of the road, with limited escape routes for vehicles. "They're trying to set up another ambush," she said, more to herself than to Johnson. "How can you tell?" he asked. Sarah pointed to the ridgeline visible in the distance. "See how the road curves there? If I wanted to stop a convoy, that's exactly where I'd do it." High ground, clear fields of fire, and the road forces vehicles to slow down for the turn. Johnson's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "So, what do we do?" Before Sarah could answer, Lieutenant Thompson's voice came over the radio from the lead Humvee. "This is Hawk 6. We've got confirmation of enemy movement in those hills. At least 3 vehicles, possibly more personnel on foot." Captain Rodriguez responded immediately. "All stations, prepare for contact. We're going to push through fast and hard. Gunners, be ready to engage targets of opportunity." But Sarah was already thinking differently. She keyed her radio, speaking for the first time as something other than a logistics specialist. "Captain, this is Martinez. Request permission to dismount before we reach the ambush site." A pause. "Explain your tactical reasoning, Martinez." "Sir, if I can get into those hills before the convoy arrives, I can eliminate the ambush from behind. Give them something to worry about besides shooting at our vehicles." Another pause. Longer this time. Sarah could almost hear Captain Rodriguez weighing the risks. Finally, "Negative, Martinez. Too dangerous to operate alone in enemy territory. Sir, with respect, it's more dangerous to drive straight into another prepared ambush. They're expecting us to come down that road. They won't be looking for a single person coming up behind them." Staff Sergeant Davis cut into the conversation. "Captain, she just proved she can handle herself. And she's right about the tactical situation." The radio crackled with silence for several moments. Finally, Captain Rodriguez spoke again. "Martinez, you have 5 minutes to get into position before we approach the ambush site. Do not engage unless you have clear shots and can confirm enemy combatants." "Understood, sir." 5 minutes. The convoy stopped, and Sarah quickly gathered her equipment. Along with her grandfather's rifle, she took extra ammunition, her sidearm, and a basic radio. The other soldiers watched her with a mixture of admiration and concern as she prepared to venture alone into hostile territory. Sergeant Major Williams approached as she checked her gear one final time. "Martinez, you sure about this? There could be a dozen insurgents up there." Sarah shouldered her rifle and looked up at the hills. "Sergeant Major, my grandfather always told me that one good sniper is worth a platoon of regular infantry in the right situation. Today, we find out if he was right." She moved out immediately, using the terrain to mask her approach. The rocky landscape provided excellent concealment for someone who knew how to use it. Sarah had learned from her grandfather not just how to shoot, but how to move invisibly through hostile territory. As she climbed toward the enemy positions, Sarah could hear vehicle engines in the distance. The insurgents were moving into their ambush positions, confident they would repeat their earlier success. They had no idea that death was approaching them from behind. Sarah reached a position about 200 yards behind the enemy line. Through her scope, she could see the insurgent vehicles parked behind a ridgeline, and at least 8 fighters moving between prepared positions. They had set up a devastating crossfire that would have torn the convoy apart. She keyed her radio quietly. "Overwatch in position. Count 8 enemy personnel, 3 vehicles. They're ready to engage you when you come around the curve." "Copy that, Overwatch." "Are you in position to neutralize the threat?" Sarah studied the enemy positions through her scope. The insurgents were spread out over about a quarter mile, but they were focused entirely on the road below. None of them were watching their back trail. "Affirmative. Beginning engagement in 30 seconds. When you hear shooting, punch through fast." Sarah selected her first target, the insurgent leader who was coordinating the ambush positions. He was standing in the open, gesturing to his men and pointing toward the road. Through her scope, she could see him clearly at 180 yards. She controlled her breathing and squeezed the trigger. The leader dropped instantly, and chaos erupted in the enemy ranks. The insurgents began shouting and looking around wildly, trying to identify where the shot had come from. Several of them broke cover, making themselves perfect targets. Sarah worked the bolt and acquired her second target, a machine gunner who was trying to swing his weapon around to face the new threat. Another shot, another insurgent down. The remaining fighters began firing wildly in all directions, not knowing where their attacker was positioned. This exposed them further, and Sarah methodically eliminated 3 more targets in rapid succession. That's when she heard the convoy engines roaring as they accelerated toward the ambush site. The remaining insurgents were caught between Sarah's precision fire from behind and the convoy's approach from in front. They abandoned their positions and ran for their vehicles. Sarah shifted her aim to the insurgent vehicles and put rounds through their windshields and engines. 2 of the 3 vehicles were disabled before their drivers could escape. The third vehicle managed to start up and begin fleeing, but it had to drive directly past Sarah's position. She led the moving vehicle perfectly and put a round through the driver's window. The truck veered off the road and crashed into a boulder, ending the threat completely. In less than 4 minutes, Sarah had single-handedly destroyed an entire ambush that could have devastated the convoy. As the military vehicles roared past the abandoned enemy positions below, she could hear cheering over the radio. "Outstanding work. Overwatch." Captain Rodriguez's voice carried genuine excitement. "Return to the convoy for extraction." But as Sarah began moving down toward the road, she spotted something that made her freeze. Movement in the hills, on the opposite side of the route, indicated more insurgents approaching. The enemy had prepared multiple layers of ambush, and the convoy was about to drive into the second one. "All stations, this is Overwatch," she radioed urgently. "Additional enemy forces approaching from the east. At least 2 squads, possibly more." "Copy that. Can you intercept?" Sarah assessed the tactical situation quickly. The new insurgent force was moving to cut off the convoy's escape route about 2 miles ahead. If they succeeded, the convoy would be trapped between 2 enemy positions, with nowhere to go. "Negative on interception, but I can slow them down. Continue mission. I'll provide overwatch and delay the enemy advance." "Martinez, don't be a hero. We can call for air support." "Air support is still 15 minutes out, sir. The convoy will be in the kill zone in 5 minutes. I can buy you the time you need." Sarah was already moving toward the new threat before the captain could object. She used the high ground to her advantage, taking a position where she could observe the approaching insurgents while remaining hidden herself. Through her scope, she watched 2 pickup trucks loaded with fighters approaching along a parallel route. They were trying to get ahead of the convoy to set up a roadblock. If they succeeded, the mission would fail and American soldiers would die. Sarah would not let that happen. She waited until the lead vehicle was at maximum effective range, nearly 500 yards, and took careful aim. The shot had to disable the vehicle without giving away her exact position to the dozen insurgents who would immediately start looking for her. The bullet punched through the truck's engine block, and the vehicle ground to a halt with steam pouring from under its hood. The insurgents piled out and took cover, scanning the hills for the sniper who had just disabled their transport. Sarah was already moving to a new position. Her grandfather had taught her that a sniper's greatest advantage was mobility. Shoot and move. Never stay in the same place long enough for the enemy to locate you. From her new position, she engaged the second vehicle. This shot was even more difficult, over 600 yards with the truck moving at speed over rough terrain. But Sarah had made harder shots during hunting season back in Montana. The driver slumped over the wheel, and the truck careened off the trail and rolled down a steep embankment. The remaining insurgents were now stranded on foot, too far from the convoy route to interfere with the mission. "Threat neutralized," Sarah reported. "Convoy route is clear. Incredible work, Martinez. Proceed to extraction point Bravo for pickup." But Sarah was already thinking about the bigger picture. 2 coordinated ambush attempts meant the insurgents had detailed intelligence about the convoy route and timing. Someone was feeding them information. And that someone might be planning additional attacks on the return trip. As she made her way toward the extraction point, Sarah studied the terrain with new eyes. Not just as a route to travel, but as a battlefield where she might need to operate again. Her grandfather had always said that the best snipers were thinking 3 moves ahead, like chess players with rifles. The convoy reached FOB Hawk without further incident, and Sarah was picked up by the trailing Humvee. As she climbed into the vehicle, she was met with stares of amazement from soldiers who had witnessed her radio reports but couldn't quite believe what they had heard. "Ma'am," said Corporal Stevens, one of the younger soldiers. "I've been in this unit for 2 years, and I've never seen anything like what you did today. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Sarah settled into her seat, exhausting finally beginning to catch up with her. "Practice, Corporal. Lots and lots of practice." But even as she spoke, her mind was working on a larger problem. The insurgents had shown a level of coordination and intelligence that suggested a significant threat. They knew the convoy routes, timing, and composition. That kind of information didn't come from casual observation. There was a leak somewhere in the American intelligence network, and it was going to get people killed unless someone did something about it. As the convoy unloaded at Fob Hawk, Captain Rodriguez pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. His expression was serious, but respectful in a way that had been completely absent that morning. "Martinez, I owe you an apology. We've had a trained sniper in our unit for 8 months and treated her like she was invisible. That changes today." "Thank you, sir, but there's something more important we need to discuss. The enemy coordination today wasn't random. Someone gave them detailed information about our convoy." Captain Rodriguez nodded grimly. "I was thinking the same thing. The timing was too precise, the positions too well prepared. We have a security leak. Sir, I'd like permission to investigate. A logistics specialist has access to shipping schedules, route plans, and personnel assignments. I might be able to identify patterns that others would miss." "Granted. But Martinez, you're not just a logistics specialist anymore. After today, everyone knows what you're really capable of. That makes you a target." Sarah thought about her grandfather's words about being a target. "If the enemy knows you're dangerous, Sarah, it means you're doing your job right." "I understand the risks, sir. But if there's a traitor in our ranks, they need to be stopped before more people die." Captain Rodriguez extended his hand. "Welcome to the war, Martinez. The real war." As Sarah shook his hand, she realized that her transformation was complete. She was no longer the invisible cargo girl who moved supplies and counted inventory. She was now a recognized weapon in America's arsenal, and her enemies were about to discover just how deadly an underestimated woman could be. But with that recognition came new dangers. Word of her actions would spread quickly through both friendly and enemy networks. The next time she went into combat, the insurgents would be looking for her specifically. Sarah Martinez was about to become the hunted as well as the hunter. 2 weeks after the convoy ambush, Sarah Martinez sat in the intelligence tent at Forward Operating Base Hawk, surrounded by shipping schedules, personnel files, and communication logs. Her new assignment was officially listed as Special Operations Support, but everyone knew what she really did now. The entire base had heard the story of how the quiet logistics specialist had turned into a legendary marksman in a single day. But reputation was a double-edged sword. Sarah had noticed increased enemy activity around the base, and intelligence reports suggested that insurgent forces were specifically hunting for an American sniper. They had put a price on her head. A substantial bounty for anyone who could eliminate the soldier they now called the Ghost of Route Falcon. "Find anything yet?" Captain Rodriguez asked, entering the tent with 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Sarah and sat down across from her makeshift desk. Sarah rubbed her tired eyes and gestured to the papers scattered in front of her. "I've been going through every convoy schedule, supply manifest, and personnel movement for the past 3 months. The pattern is subtle, but it's there." She pulled out a series of documents and laid them side by side. "Look at these shipping schedules. Every convoy that was ambushed had their routes changed within 24 hours of departure. Small changes, a different departure time, an alternate route, a modified cargo list. Changes that would only be noticed by someone with access to the logistics database." Captain Rodriguez leaned forward, studying the documents. "That narrows it down to about 15 people on the base. Do you have any specific suspects?" "3 possibilities," Sarah replied, pulling out personnel files. "Sergeant Miller in communications has access to all the route changes and timing updates. Corporal Baker in the supply office handles cargo manifests and shipping schedules. And Lieutenant Nash in intelligence has access to everything. All 3 have clean records and security clearances," Rodriguez noted. How do we identify which one is the leak? Sarah smiled grimly. We set a trap. I've prepared 3 different fake convoy schedules, each with slightly different information. Tomorrow, I'll make sure each suspect sees only one version. Whichever version the insurgents respond to will tell us who's feeding them information. Before Rodriguez could respond, an urgent voice crackled over the base communication system. All personnel to battle stations. We have multiple enemy vehicles approaching from the north and east. This appears to be a coordinated attack on the base. Sarah grabbed her rifle and equipment while Rodriguez ran to the command center. Through the tent opening, she could see muzzle flashes in the darkness as enemy forces opened fire on the base perimeter. This wasn't a simple harassment attack. The insurgents were launching a full-scale assault. Martinez, report to the North Watchtower immediately, came the order over her radio. We need your skills up there now. Sarah sprinted across the base as mortar rounds exploded around her. The North Watchtower was under heavy attack, with insurgent forces trying to breach the perimeter fence. She could see the tower's defenders struggling to hold their positions against overwhelming numbers. She reached the tower and climbed to the top level, where she found Sergeant Davis and 3 other soldiers laying down suppressive fire with machine guns and rifles. The enemy was well organized and well equipped, using military tactics rather than the guerrilla warfare they typically employed. Thank God you're here, Davis shouted over the gunfire. They've got us pinned down. At least 30 insurgents in 3 separate groups, and they're coordinated, like professional soldiers. Sarah looked through her scope at the attacking force. Davis was right. This wasn't typical insurgent behavior. The attackers were moving with military precision, using proper cover and communication. Someone had trained them well. They're not local fighters, she realized. These are foreign operatives, probably special forces from a hostile nation. That changed everything. If foreign military units were operating in their area, it meant the conflict had escalated far beyond local insurgency. It also meant the attackers would have advanced training and equipment, making them much more dangerous than typical enemies. Sarah identified the enemy command position and took aim at what appeared to be the assault leader. The shot was over 400 yards through darkness, with the added challenge of multiple obstacles and moving targets, but she had trained for exactly these conditions. The enemy commander dropped with her first shot, and the coordinated attack immediately began to falter. Without central leadership, the 3 assault groups started acting independently, breaking their tactical discipline. Sarah worked methodically, targeting enemy machine gunners and squad leaders. Each shot removed a key element from the attacking force, degrading their combat effectiveness. But there were too many targets for one sniper to handle, and the attackers were beginning to adapt to her presence. They're trying to flank the tower, Sergeant Davis warned. Squad, moving around the east side. Sarah swung her rifle toward the flanking force and saw something that made her blood run cold. One of the attackers was carrying advanced sniper equipment, a rifle and scope that could match her own capabilities. The insurgents had brought their own marksmen to counter her. The enemy sniper was setting up a position about 600 yards away, using a disabled vehicle for cover. If he completed his setup, he would have a perfect shot at the watchtower and everyone in it. Sarah faced a crucial decision. She could continue picking off the assault teams and hope someone else dealt with the sniper, or she could engage in a deadly duel with an opponent who might be just as skilled as she was. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. Sometimes, Sarah, you have to take the hardest shot to protect the people counting on you. Sarah adjusted her scope and lined up the most difficult shot of her military career. The enemy sniper was partially concealed behind cover, presenting only a small target at extreme range. She would have one chance. If she missed, he would locate her position and return fire with equal precision. She controlled her breathing, calculated wind drift and bullet drop, and squeezed the trigger. The enemy sniper's rifle fell silent before he could take his first shot. With their marksmen eliminated and their commander dead, the attacking force began a fighting withdrawal. Sarah continued engaging targets of opportunity, making each shot count as the insurgents retreated into the darkness. Cease fire, cease fire, Rodriguez's voice came over the radio. Enemy forces are withdrawing. All units report casualties and status. The battle was over, but Sarah knew it was only a temporary victory. The fact that foreign operatives were now actively hunting her meant the conflict was entering a new phase. Her reputation as the ghost of Route Falcon had made her a strategic target. "Outstanding work again, Martinez," Rodriguez said, climbing up to the watchtower. "That sniper duel probably saved a dozen lives." "Sir, this attack confirms something important," Sarah replied. "Whoever leaked our convoy information has escalated to providing intelligence for direct attacks on our base. The traitor isn't just sharing schedules anymore. They're actively supporting enemy operations." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "Which means we need to identify them immediately." "Did you deploy those test documents?" "Yes, sir." Each suspect received different information about a fake supply run scheduled for tomorrow morning. "Whichever version the insurgents act on will identify our traitor." But as they spoke, Sarah noticed movement in the distance that sent alarm bells ringing in her head. Vehicle lights were approaching the base from an unexpected direction. The same direction that friendly reinforcements should be coming from. "Captain, those vehicles approaching from the south." Rodriguez checked his radio. "Negative. All friendly units are accounted for." Sarah raised her rifle and looked through the scope. What she saw made her heart race. The approaching vehicles weren't American. They were insurgent trucks disguised to look like friendly forces, probably hoping to exploit the confusion after the base attack to infiltrate the perimeter. "Contact south," she called out. Enemy vehicles disguised as friendlies approaching the main gate. The base defenders immediately swung their weapons toward the new threat, but the fake convoy was already close to the perimeter. If they reached the gate, they could cause massive damage before anyone realized they were hostile. Sarah made rapid calculations. The lead vehicle was over 800 yards away and moving fast. It was an extremely difficult shot under the best conditions, and these were far from ideal. But if she could disable the lead vehicle, it would block the road and prevent the others from reaching the gate. She aimed for the driver's position and led the target carefully. The bullet struck true, and the lead truck veered off the road and rolled over, blocking the path for the vehicles behind it. The remaining insurgents abandoned their deception and opened fire on the base from their stopped position. But now the defenders were ready for them, and the enemy was caught in the open with no cover. The second attack was repelled even faster than the first, with Sarah providing precise fire support to eliminate key targets while the base's defensive weapons handled the rest. As dawn broke over the base, the full scope of the night's events became clear. The insurgents had launched a sophisticated two-phase attack, using intelligence provided by someone inside the American perimeter. The scale and coordination of the assault made it clear that the security leak was far more dangerous than anyone had realized. "Martinez," Rodriguez called out, approaching with a grim expression. "We just intercepted enemy communications about tonight's attacks. They knew about our defensive positions, our reaction times, and even which tower you'd be assigned to." "Sir, that level of detail could only come from someone with access to our operational planning. The leak goes higher than I thought." Before Rodriguez could respond, Lieutenant Nash from intelligence approached with a radio in his hand. "Captain, I've been monitoring insurgent communications all night. I think I know who our traitor is." Sarah studied Nash's expression carefully. Something about his timing felt wrong. Too convenient, too perfectly timed. "What did you discover?" Rodriguez asked. "The intercepted communications mentioned payments being made to Falcon. Obviously a code name. The payments were arranged through the base communication system, which means our traitor is Sergeant Miller." Sarah's instincts screamed that something was wrong. She'd been watching Nash carefully, and his story was too neat, too convenient. Her grandfather had taught her to trust her gut, especially when someone was trying too hard to convince her of something. "Lieutenant Nash," she said carefully, "what frequency were those communications on?" "Standard insurgent tactical frequency, 421.7 megahertz. Sarah knew immediately that Nash was lying. She had monitored insurgent communications extensively during her investigation, and they never used that frequency. It was a test frequency, used only for training exercises. "Sir," she said to Rodriguez, "I need to check something in the communications log." Nash's expression shifted slightly, barely perceptible, but Sarah caught it. The look of someone who realized they had just made a critical mistake. "That won't be necessary," Nash said quickly. "I have all the evidence we need right here." But Sarah was already moving. In one smooth motion, she drew her sidearm and pointed it at Nash. "Step away from the radio, Lieutenant." Slowly. "Martinez, what are you doing?" Rodriguez demanded. "Sir, Lieutenant Nash just lied about the communication frequency. No insurgent unit uses 421.7 megahertz. It's a training frequency. He's trying to frame Sergeant Miller for his own crimes." Nash's hand moved toward his sidearm, but Sarah's weapon was already trained on him. "I wouldn't recommend it, sir. You've seen what I can do with a rifle. My pistol work is just as good." Faced with certain death if he drew his weapon, Nash slowly raised his hands. "You can't prove anything." "Actually, I can," Sarah replied. "Yesterday, I gave you fake information about a convoy carrying medical supplies to FOB Charlie. No such convoy exists, and no such base exists. But I guarantee if we check insurgent communications from last night, we'll find them planning to attack that fake convoy." Rodriguez was already on his radio, requesting a communication intercept check. Within minutes, the confirmation came back. Insurgent forces had indeed been planning to ambush the non-existent convoy to FOB Charlie. Nash was arrested immediately, and a search of his quarters revealed communication equipment, codes, and a substantial amount of money that could only have come from enemy sources. "How long have you known?" Rodriguez asked Sarah as they watched Nash being led away in handcuffs. "I suspected him from the beginning, but I needed proof." The story he told about intercepted communications was the final evidence I needed. He got greedy and tried to frame someone else instead of just staying quiet. "And the attacks tonight?" Sarah looked at the damage around the base. Bullet holes, blast craters, and the debris from 2 destroyed insurgent forces. Nash gave them detailed intelligence about our defenses and my location. They thought they could overwhelm us with superior numbers and eliminate me with their own sniper. They were wrong. "Yes, sir, they were. But this won't end here. My reputation is spreading, and more enemy units will come looking for me. The difference is, now they know they're hunting someone who can fight back." As the sun rose fully over the base, Sarah Martinez stood on the watchtower and looked out at the Afghan landscape. 6 months ago, she had been dismissed as just another logistics specialist, invisible to her fellow soldiers and irrelevant to the war effort. Now she was the ghost of Root Falcon, a legendary marksman whose very presence changed the balance of power in her sector. Enemy forces planned entire operations around eliminating her, and American units requested her specifically for their most dangerous missions. The transformation from cargo girl to combat legend was complete. But Sarah knew that with great reputation came even greater responsibility. Every shot she took, every mission she completed, every enemy she eliminated, added to the legend that both protected and endangered her. Her grandfather would have been proud. The quiet girl he had taught to hunt in the Montana mountains had become exactly what he had always said she could be: a guardian, a protector, and when necessary, an instrument of precise, deadly justice. The war was far from over, and Sarah Martinez would face many more battles in the months to come. But she would face them as something she had never been allowed to be before: a recognized, respected, and feared soldier in the United States Army. The girl they had dismissed as cargo girl had become the woman who protected them all.